Hello and thank you for joining me. My name is Juliet, I'm 34 years old, and for the last 8 years, I've been living what I can only describe as a quiet, peaceful, and deliberately constructed life. I thought I had escaped the ghosts of my past, that I had successfully cauterized a wound that nearly destroyed me. I was wrong. I thought I was returning home to help my ailing father, but I had no idea I was actually walking into a trap set by my own history. A trap that would lead me to uncover a lie so vast and so cruel it would redefine the very meaning of betrayal. Before I tell you how a dusty, forgotten cardboard box in my parents' attic exposed a conspiracy that had poisoned my life for nearly a decade, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your own family, or if you've ever had to fight to have your own truth heard, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps to know we're not alone. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe because this is a community for people who have had to find their own strength when the world tried to take it away. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about a shattered engagement. It's about the terrifying realization that the person you trusted most in the world can be the very architect of your deepest pain. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, a day so aggressively ordinary it felt like a personal insult. I was in my sun-drenched home office, a space I'd designed myself with pale wood floors and a wall of windows overlooking a garden I'd nurtured from bare dirt. My partner, Alex, was in the kitchen, the smell of brewing coffee and his soft humming a familiar comfort. We'd built this life together, brick by brick, out of the ashes of my old one. Then my phone rang, displaying the one name that could still make my stomach clench. Mom! I stared at it for a moment, the hum in the kitchen suddenly seeming very far away. I answered, my voice carefully neutral. Hi, Mom. Her voice was a frantic, splintered thing. Juliet, it's your father. He's had a heart attack. A bad one. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My own heart seemed to stop, then restart with a painful thud. Alex was instantly at my side, his hand on my shoulder, his face a canvas of concern. The rest of the conversation was a blur of medical terms, hospital names, and my mother's choked sobs. He was stable for now. But they needed me. I needed to come home. The word itself was a lie. It wasn't a home. It was a house, a museum of a life I had fled. It was the place where my world had been shattered by the two men I loved most, my fiancé, Leo, and my older brother, Matthew. The flight was a 4-hour descent into a past I had meticulously walled off. With every mile we traveled eastward, the peaceful, sunlit world of my present seemed to recede, replaced by the gray, suffocating memories of my past. Alex had wanted to come with me, his quiet strength a shield I desperately wanted to hide behind. I'll book a flight, Jules. I can be there by tonight. You shouldn't have to face them alone, he had said, his eyes dark with worry as he drove me to the airport. I had kissed him, my hands shaking slightly. Not yet, I'd whispered. This first part I have to do it by myself. I need to know if I can. He hadn't pushed, but he'd made me promise to call him for anything at any hour. The plane's engine was a dull roar, a perfect soundtrack for the storm in my mind. I closed my eyes and the memories, always lurking just beneath the surface, rushed in with the force of a tidal wave. 8 years ago, I was 26 and incandescently happy. I was engaged to Leo, a man with a laugh that could fill a room and eyes that saw a version of me I was only just beginning to believe in. We were planning a future, a life filled with the kind of simple, joyful moments I'd always craved. My brother Matthew was my hero. 2 years my senior, he was the golden child, effortlessly charming, intelligent, and the undisputed favorite of our parents. I adored him. He was my confidant, my protector, the one person I thought would always be in my corner. The betrayal, when it came, was so catastrophic because it came from both of them, a pincer movement that crushed the foundations of my world. I remember the day with a clarity that still felt like a physical blow. It was a Saturday. I'd come home early from a bridal shower luncheon, wanting to surprise Leo. I walked into our shared apartment, calling his name, a smile on my face. The silence that answered was the first warning bell. I walked toward the bedroom and I heard voices. Murmur. A laugh that wasn't Leo's. It was Matthew's. My blood ran cold. I pushed the bedroom door open. And there they were. The image is burned into my memory like a brand. The tangle of limbs, the shock on their faces, the sickening, instant understanding of what I was seeing. The world didn't just tilt. It disintegrated. The scream that tore from my throat felt like it was ripping my soul out with it. The confrontation that followed was a chaotic blur of rage and tears. I remember throwing the engagement ring, the diamond skittering across the hardwood floor like a dead, glittering insect. I remember packing a bag with trembling, useless hands, their pleas and excuses a meaningless drone in my ears. But the worst part, the part that truly broke me, came later that evening at my parents' house. I had fled there, seeking refuge, expecting solace. Instead, I found a tribunal. Matthew and Leo were already there, sitting on the sofa, looking pale and somber. Matthew, ever the master of ceremonies, had already spun his tale. "Juliet, thank God you're here," my father had said. His voice laced with that familiar tone of disappointment he reserved for me. "Matthew and Leo have told us everything." Matthew stood up. His face a perfect mask of contrition. "Jules, I am so sorry," he began, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. "It was a moment of absolute madness. Terrible mutual mistake. We both feel sick about it. I betrayed you, and I betrayed Leo as a friend." He looked at Leo, who nodded numbly, his eyes fixed on the floor. A mutual mistake. The phrase was so clean, so sterile, so perfectly designed to spread the blame like butter on toast, making it palatable for everyone. It erased the power dynamics, the context, the sheer predatory nature of what he had done. He hadn't just slept with my fiancé. He had taken him from me in our bed in our home. I stared at him dumbfounded. "A mutual mistake," choked out, my voice raw. "You came into my home, Matthew. You with him." I couldn't finish. My mother stepped forward, her hands fluttering nervously. "Juliet, please. Your brother is devastated. They both are. It was a horrible thing, yes, but they are trying to take responsibility. You need to be the bigger person here. You need to be willing to forgive." Forgive. They were talking about forgiveness when the wound was still gushing, when I could still see their faces, flushed and guilty, in my mind's eye. They wanted me to skip the grief and the rage and jump straight to absolution because it was more comfortable for them. It was then that I saw the trap. Matthew hadn't just betrayed me. He had already controlled the narrative, painting himself as a fellow victim of a moment's weakness. And my family, my parents, had bought it completely. They looked at their perfect son, so handsome and remorseful, and they chose to believe him. I was just the hysterical, unforgiving daughter who was making a difficult situation worse with my messy emotions. So I did the only thing I could. Cut them off. Both of them. I told Leo it was over, that I never wanted to see him again. I told Matthew he was dead to me. And when my parents pleaded with me to be reasonable, to not tear the family apart over one mistake, I packed my bags and left town. I moved across the country, found a new job, made new friends, and eventually I met Alex. I built a new world, a fortress of peace and genuine love. I told myself I had healed. But healing is a tricky thing. You can build a scar over a wound, but if the poison is still inside, it's not truly healed. Just dormant. Landing in my old hometown felt like stepping through a time warp. The air itself seemed heavy with memories. I took a cab from the airport directly to the hospital, bracing myself for the inevitable. The antiseptic smell of the cardiac ICU was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the messy emotions churning inside me. I found my mother in the waiting area, her face pale and puffy. She hugged me, a brittle, desperate embrace. "He's been asking for you," she whispered, as if my presence was a balm she could apply to my father's conscience. Walking into his room was surreal. My father, a man I remembered as robust and commanding, looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, a web of tubes and wires connecting him to a chorus of beeping machines. His eyes fluttered open as I approached. "Juliet," he rasped, his voice thin. "You came." Before I could answer, A shadow fell over the bed. Of course she came, Dad. She's here for you. It was Matthew. He stood there in a crisp shirt and slacks, looking every bit the responsible, in-charge son. He smiled at me, a tight, polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jules, it's good to see you. The lie was so effortless, so practiced, it made my skin crawl. He immediately took over, speaking to the nurse, asking sharp, intelligent questions about my father's medication and prognosis. He was performing, putting on a show for the nurses, for our parents, for me. He was Matthew, the capable one, the one who stayed, the one who held everything together while his flighty, emotional sister ran away. The old rage, the one I thought I'd buried, simmered just below the surface. He hadn't changed at all. He had just had 8 years to perfect his role. That evening, my mother insisted on a family dinner at the house. It was as awful as I had imagined. She bustled around the kitchen, forcing a sense of normalcy that felt grotesque under the circumstances. Matthew sat across from me at the dining table, recounting stories of his recent business successes. His voice smooth and confident. He was a partner at a prestigious architecture firm now. Course he was. Success was his birthright. My mother beamed at him. Matthew has been such a rock through all of this, she said, looking at me pointedly. I don't know what I would have done without him. The implication was clear. Unlike you, who was gone, I just picked at the dried chicken on my plate, the silence my only defense. The air was thick with unspoken words, with 8 years of resentment and unacknowledged pain. My mother finally broke, her voice wobbling with forced cheerfulness. It's just so good to have you home, Juliet. In times like these, we have to let bygones be bygones, don't we? Family is what matters. Let bygones be bygones. The phrase echoed the one she'd used 8 years ago. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was a demand for my silence. It was an order to swallow my pain so that the family could maintain its comfortable, false peace. I felt the walls of the house closing in on me, the same suffocating pressure that had driven me away. I needed to escape. I'm really tired, I said, pushing my chair back. I think I'm going to turn in. My mother's face fell, a brief flash of disappointment before she rearranged it into a look of understanding. Of course, dear. You've had a long day. As I was heading for the stairs, she called after me. Juliet, while you're here, would you mind doing something for me? I need to find your father's old life insurance policy. I think it's in one of those boxes in the attic. Could you look tomorrow? My nerves are just too frayed to face that mess up there. It was a classic move. Give the difficult child a menial task to make her feel useful, to keep her occupied and out of the way. Fine, I said, my voice flat. I just wanted to get to the guest room, the room that was once mine, and call Alex. I needed to hear his voice, a lifeline back to the reality I had created for myself, a world where I wasn't the designated problem. I had no idea that her simple, dismissive request would be the key that unlocked everything. She was sending me into the attic to find an insurance policy, but what I was about to find was the truth. The next morning, I delayed the inevitable. I drank my coffee slowly, staring out the kitchen window at the too green lawn of my childhood. The house was quiet. My mother had already left for the hospital, leaving me a note with her familiar looping cursive, reminding me about the attic. Felt like a chore, a punishment. Finally, with a heavy sigh, I pulled down the folding stairs in the hallway ceiling. A puff of stale, dusty air washed over me as the stairs creaked into place. The attic was exactly as I remembered it. A shadowy, cavernous space filled with the ghosts of a life that no longer felt like mine. Cardboard boxes were stacked precariously, labeled in my father's blocky print or my mother's script. Christmas ornaments, Juliet's schoolwork K5, Matthew's trophies. The last one was a particularly large, sturdy box. Course it was. I started my search, my mission a convenient excuse to be alone, to be away from the charged atmosphere of the main house. I moved boxes, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from a dormer window. I found the box labeled, important papers easily enough, but a quick rifle through its contents, Old tax returns, car titles, appliance warranties, revealed no insurance policy. Have to dig deeper. I spent the next hour sifting through the detritus of our family's history. I found my old high school yearbooks, my own face smiling out at me, blissfully unaware of the future. I found a box of Matthew's university textbooks on structural engineering, a box of my mother's failed pottery projects. It was a tedious, melancholy task. I was about to give up, to tell my mother I couldn't find it, when my foot bumped against something tucked away behind a stack of old suitcases, hidden in the darkest corner of the eaves. It wasn't a filing box. It was a simple brown cardboard shoebox, the kind you'd get with a pair of sensible sneakers. It was sealed with yellowing tape. What caught my eye was the writing on the top. In my mother's handwriting it said my name, Juliet. But my name had been angrily crossed out with a thick black marker, a violent slash of ink that spoke of frustration and dismissal. A chill went down my spine. Why would she do that? Curiosity, sharp and insistent, replaced my fatigue. My fingers fumbled with the brittle tape, peeling it back. I lifted the lid. The box was full. It was packed to the brim with letters. Dozens of them. They were all in standard white envelopes, all addressed to me, to this very house. And I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was bold and slightly slanted, a script I had once known as well as my own. It was Leo's. My heart began to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I pulled out the top envelope. The postmark was clear. October 12, 2016. 2 weeks after I had left. 2 weeks into my new, shattered life. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. The letter inside was written on simple lined paper, the ink slightly smeared in places, as if by a damp hand. I sank down onto the dusty floorboards, the single beam of light illuminating the page. My dearest Juliet, it began. My breath hitched. Asterisk. I know you don't want to hear from me. I know you hate me and you have every right. But I can't live with the version of the story you have. I have to try to tell you the truth. Matthew is twisting everything. He's telling your parents that I pursued him, that I was unhappy with you and seduced him, that it was all my idea. It's not true, Jules. I swear on my life it's not true. He came on to me. He had been doing it for weeks, making comments, telling me you were pulling away, that you were having doubts about the wedding. He was planting seeds of insecurity, telling me things I now know were lies. I was weak and I was stupid and I let him get in my head. I hate myself more than you could ever hate me. But please, you have to believe me. This wasn't a mutual mistake. It was a calculated act of destruction, and he was the one holding the bomb. Asterisk. I read the last line again. A calculated act of destruction. The words seemed to vibrate on the page. I felt a wave of dizziness, my mind struggling to process it. This was a completely different narrative. In the story I had lived with for 8 years, Leo was an equal partner in my betrayal. He had stood there, shoulder to shoulder with Matthew, and let him deliver the mutual mistake speech. But this letter painted him as another one of Matthew's victims. I reached for another envelope, my movements frantic now. The next one was dated a week later. Asterisk. Jules, I tried to call again today. Your mom answered. She was polite but cold. She said you weren't taking my calls and that I should respect your wishes. I tried to explain, to tell her that Matthew was lying, but she just said, Leo, we think it's best for everyone if we just let this rest. They're protecting him. They've closed ranks around him and left us both on the outside. He has them completely convinced. I feel like I'm screaming into a void. Asterisk. I scrambled through the box, pulling out letter after letter, a cascade of white envelopes spilling onto the dusty floor. It was a chronicle of my brother's deceit, laid out in chronological order. One letter, from early November, described an encounter. Asterisk. I drove by your friend Sarah's house, hoping I could catch you there, just to talk for 5 minutes. Matthew's car was in the driveway. He came out before I could even get to the door. He told me to leave you alone. He said I was harassing you and that if I didn't stop, he would get a restraining order. He looked triumphant, Jules. He was enjoying it. He told me, just stick to the story. It's better this way. She'll get over it and eventually she'll forgive us both. If you blow this up and tell her your version, you'll lose everyone and she'll never speak to either of us again. He was threatening me, using your parents and your forgiveness as a weapon. Asterisk. My blood turned to ice. Matthew had actively blocked him. He had stood as a gatekeeper not just to my family, but to my entire life, threatening Leo to ensure his silence. My mind raced, connecting the dots. I remembered how, in those first few months after I left, I had waited by the phone, a small, secret part of me expecting, hoping for, a real apology from Leo, a real explanation. But the calls never came. The letters never arrived. My silence was met with silence, which I had interpreted as his final, damning confirmation of guilt and indifference. But he hadn't been silent. He had been shouting. And my brother had been standing there, his hand clamped firmly over Leo's mouth, ensuring I heard nothing. I kept reading, my eyes burning from the dust and the unshed tears. The letters became more desperate, then more resigned. He wrote about selling our apartment, about quitting his job. He was being erased just as I was. Then I found it. The letter that changed everything. The one that exposed the rot at the core of Matthew's soul. It was dated in late December, near my birthday. Asterisk. Jules, I don't know if you'll ever see this. I don't think you will. I'm starting to think he's getting these somehow. I tried to send a package to you for your birthday. Just a book I thought you'd like and this letter. I went to the house. Your mom wasn't home, but Matthew was. He saw the package in my hand and he smiled that tight, awful smile. He took it from me. He said, I'll make sure she gets it. I know he won't. There was something in his eyes. I don't trust him. I never should have. He's not who you think he is, Jules. He was always jealous of us. He told me once, after we got engaged, that he was the one who should be giving you away at your wedding, not your dad. He said it like a joke, but it wasn't funny. It was creepy. He talked about you like you were his. He's always wanted to be the center of your world, even if it meant he had to be the one to burn it down. He didn't just want to have what you had. He wanted to be the reason you had nothing. Asterisk. I dropped the letter as if it had burned my fingers. A wave of nausea washed over me. It wasn't just a betrayal born of lust or a moment's weakness. It was a coup. It was a long, calculated campaign born of a dark, possessive jealousy I had never, ever suspected. Matthew hadn't just stumbled into breaking my heart. He had engineered it. He had targeted Leo, manipulated him, and then systematically dismantled any chance for the truth to emerge. He had curated my reality, sculpting my pain and isolation to serve his own twisted need to be the hero, the savior, the most important man in my life, even if he had to become the villain to do it. The affair wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was this box. It was 8 years of stolen words, stolen closure, stolen truth. He had let me believe I was unforgiving and cold, while he was the one holding the gag, intercepting the letters, and hiding the evidence of his profound, monstrous deception. He had painted me as the villain in a story where he was the only criminal. The final letters in the box were heartbreaking in their simplicity. Leo's tone had shifted from frantic to defeated. He had accepted that he would never reach me. I'm moving to Oregon next week, the last one said. Asterisk. I need to start over somewhere no one knows my name. I hope one day you find happiness, Juliet. And I hope one day you find out that I'm not the monster you think I am. I was a coward, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But he was the monster. He stole our future, and then he stole my chance to even apologize for my part in it. Goodbye, Jules. Asterisk. I sat there on the floor of the attic, surrounded by the ghosts of what might have been, the air thick with the dust of 8 years of lies. The grief I felt was sharp and new, not for the lost love, but for the lost truth. For the 8 years I had spent carrying a burden of bitterness that wasn't entirely mine to bear. I had built a new life on a foundation of lies, a reality carefully constructed by my own brother. My hand, trembling, found my phone in my pocket. I dialed Alex's number. He answered on the first ring. "Jules, is everything okay? You sound—" "I'm not okay," I whispered, my voice breaking for the first time. The dam of my composure finally crumbled. The tears came, hot and furious, a torrent of rage and grief and a strange, terrifying sense of validation. "Alex, I found something." Through choked sobs I told him everything. About the box, the letters, the deliberate, systematic deception. I read him excerpts from Leo's letters, my voice cracking over the words. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then Alex's voice, low and seething with a fury that was all for me. "Juliet, that is one of the most evil things I have ever heard. That's not just a lie. That's psychological warfare." "He let me think I was crazy," I whispered. "He let me think I was the cold one, the one who couldn't forgive. He built a cage of lies around me and let me sit in it for 8 years. What are you going to do?" Alex asked, his voice gentle but firm. I looked at the box of letters, at the proof of my brother's monstrous betrayal. A strange calm settled over me, displacing the grief. It was the cold, hard clarity of purpose. The victim was gone. The woman who had fled in shame and confusion was gone. In her place was someone who had just been handed a weapon. "I'm going to do what I should have done 8 years ago," I said, my voice steady now, devoid of tears. "I'm going to burn it all down." That evening, the house felt like a stage set for a tragedy. My father had been discharged for the night, a brief reprieve before a major bypass surgery scheduled in 2 days. He was ensconced in his favorite armchair in the living room, a blanket over his lap, looking exhausted but relieved to be home. My mother fluttered around him, her anxiety a palpable presence in the room, while Matthew sat opposite him, looking concerned and dutiful. They were playing the roles they had perfected: the ailing patriarch, the devoted wife, the stalwart son. They were a perfect family portrait, a tableau of loving concern. I waited until they were all settled, until the false quiet of the evening had descended. Then I made my entrance. I walked into the living room, holding the cardboard shoebox. I didn't slam it down. I placed it gently on the center of the polished oak coffee table, right between my father and Matthew. The soft thud it made was the only sound in the room. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. I was unervingly calm, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. This wasn't the wild, hysterical grief of 8 years ago. This was something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. "Matthew," I said, my voice even and clear, "does this box look familiar to you?" He stared at it, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not guilt. Not yet. It was confusion, followed by a dawning, animal-like alarm. He knew what it was. He just didn't know how I had it. He tried to bluff, his voice a little too smooth. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Juliet. Is this really the time for games? Dad just got home." He gestured toward our father, using him as a shield, just as I knew he would. My mother looked from him to me, her brow furrowed. "Juliet, what is this? What's in the box?" "I was in the attic today," I said, my gaze locked on Matthew. "Mom asked me to look for Dad's insurance policy. I didn't find it. But I found this. It was hidden, tucked away in a corner. It's full of old correspondence." I paused, letting the silence stretch. Dozens of letters. From Leo. Addressed to me. Written in the months right after I left. The color drained from Matthew's face. He looked, for the first time in his life, utterly cornered. My father shifted in his chair, a look of bewilderment on his face. "Letters? What letters? Leo never wrote." "Oh, he wrote," I said, a bitter smile touching my lips. "He wrote and he called. He just had the misfortune of having a gatekeeper. Someone who decided what I was and was not allowed to see. Someone who decided what truth I was allowed to know. I reached into the box and pulled out a single, crumpled letter. Held it up. This one is dated October 12th, 2 weeks after I left. In it, Leo writes, and I quote, "Matthew is twisting everything. He's telling your parents that I pursued him, that it was all my idea." I lowered the letter and looked directly at my brother. Then he goes on to say that you, Matthew, told him to stick to the mutual mistake story, because it would be better for everyone. I let the phrase hang in the air, a poisonous vapor. I turned my head to look at my parents. Does that phrase sound familiar? A mutual mistake. It's almost verbatim what you told me that night, Matthew. Did you two rehearse your lines? Matthew shot to his feet. This is insane. You're taking the word of a liar who cheated on you. He's trying to save his own skin, and you're falling for it. After all this time. Am I? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. I reached into the box and pulled out another letter. This one is from November. In it, Leo describes trying to see me at my friend Sarah's house. But you were there, weren't you, Matthew? You met him on the lawn. You told him he was harassing me and you threatened him with a restraining order. You told him to stay away. You weren't protecting me. You were isolating me. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Matthew, is that true? He didn't answer her. He just glared at me, his eyes blazing with a desperate, hateful fury. The mask was gone. This was the real Matthew. The one from Leo's letters. But this one, I said, my voice dropping. This one is my favorite. I pulled out the last letter, the one about my birthday. I held it as if it were a piece of radioactive waste. This is the one where Leo writes about trying to give you a package for me. My birthday present. He said you took it and you smiled and you promised you would make sure I got it. Where is it, Matthew? Where is the book he sent me? He was silent. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. This is the letter where he finally understood you, I continued, pressing my advantage. He wrote about how you were jealous, not just of him but of my happiness. He wrote about the strange comment you made, about how you should have been the one to give me away at my wedding. I took a step closer, my voice a low, cutting whisper. You didn't just sleep with my fiancé, Matthew. That was amateur hour. That was just the opening act. You spent the next several months executing a cover-up so complete, so insidious, it would make a dictator blush. You intercepted his letters. You blocked his calls. You threatened him. You lied to our parents. You lied to me. You systematically gaslit me for 8 years, letting me walk around this world believing that I was the cold, unforgiving monster in this story. I finally turned my full attention to him, my eyes boring into his. You didn't make a mistake. You ran a campaign. You didn't do it to protect me or to protect this family. You did it to control me. You did it because you couldn't stand to see me happy with someone else. You wanted to be the hero of a tragedy that you, and only you, created. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my father's ragged breathing. He was sitting bolt upright now, his face a mask of dawning, sickening horror. He looked from the box of letters to his son's ashen face, and then to me. My mother was openly weeping, her quiet sobs the sound of a world breaking. Matthew, my father rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Is this true? Tell me she's lying. Matthew looked at him, his composure completely shattered. He opened his mouth, and what came out was a pathetic, desperate croak. I was trying to protect the family. He was unstable. I was protecting her. The excuse was so weak, so transparent it was laughable. I let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh that held no humor. Protect me, I said, my voice ringing with the clarity of 8 years of repressed truth. You stole my closure. You stole my ability to make my own choice, based on the real facts. You stole my grief. You stole my healing. You didn't protect anything. You poisoned everything. You took a terrible situation and you made it 1,000 times worse, all to feed your own sick, narcissistic ego. I looked at my parents, my heart aching not with love, but with a profound and bottomless pity. And you too, I said, my voice hardening. You let him. You chose the easier story. You chose the son who stayed over the daughter who was hurting. You chose comfort over truth. Every single day for 8 years, you chose him over me. I picked up the shoebox, holding it to my chest like a shield. Well, the choice is mine now. I turned and walked towards the front door, the weight of their collective shock and shame pressing on my back. I'm done, I said, not looking back. I'm done with all of you. I walked out the door and into the cool night air, the sound of my mother crying my name, the first note in the symphony of my liberation. I didn't stop. I walked to my rental car, got in, and drove away from the house without a backward glance. The silence in the car was a sanctuary. I drove for miles, not to any particular destination, just away. The manicured suburban streets gave way to a dark, winding country road. I pulled over, cut the engine, and in the profound, sudden quiet of the countryside, I finally let go. The tears that came weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of release, of a validation so profound it felt like a physical force. It was the sound of 8 years of chains shattering. I screamed until my throat was raw, a primal, cathartic howl that I sent out into the indifferent darkness. Then I put the car in drive and headed for the nearest hotel. My phone, which I had tossed onto the passenger seat, began to light up almost immediately. First, it was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. A message popped up a minute later, a sobbing, incoherent plea. Then my father called. I stared at his name, my heart a confusing mix of anger and pity. I let it ring. He called again. The third time a message appeared. It was a text. Juliet, we need to talk. Please. I am so sorry. I noted, with a kind of detached irony, that Matthew did not call. He knew better. He knew there was nothing left to say. There were no more lies to tell, no more narratives to spin. He had been exposed completely and irrevocably. I checked into a generic roadside hotel, paid in cash and turned my phone off. For the first time in 8 years, I felt truly, blissfully, alone and unburdened. The next morning I booked a flight home. Not the one I was scheduled to take in a few days, but the first one I could get. I called Alex from the airport gate, my voice calm and steady. I'm coming home, I said. It's done. When he met me at the arrival's terminal hours later, I didn't have to say a word. He just opened his arms and I walked into them. The embrace wasn't one of pity. It was one of solidarity. He held me, his hand stroking my hair, and I let myself sag against him, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally draining away, leaving a clean, quiet exhaustion in its place. You did it, he whispered into my hair. You're free. And for the first time I believed it was true. A few days passed in a haze of peaceful normalcy. We took long walks, cooked together, and didn't talk about my family at all. We let the silence heal. Then, one afternoon my father called again. I was sitting in the garden and I saw his name on the screen. This time I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Dad. His voice was weak, heavy with a shame that was entirely new. Juliet, he started, his voice cracking. We failed you. Completely. Have no excuse. We believed what was easiest. We believed what let us keep our perfect family intact. I was so caught up in Matthew being the good son, the one who stayed and took care of things. I never questioned it. I never once stopped to think about how you must have been feeling. He took a ragged breath. I am so sorry. For all of it. He told me that after I left, the house had erupted. He had confronted Matthew, who, stripped of his lies, had confessed to everything. The whole sordid, manipulative story. Matthew had packed a bag and left. He was staying with a friend. The family, the one they had tried so hard to protect with their lies, was broken anyway. The call was difficult, but it was the first honest conversation I had ever had with my father. A week later, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. It was a letter from my mother. The irony was not lost on me. Her handwriting, the same looping script that had crossed my name off that fateful box, was shaky now. It was a long, rambling letter, full of regret and self-recrimination. "I see it all so clearly now," she wrote. I enabled him. His entire life I made excuses for him, I smoothed things over, I let him believe he was infallible. I let him become the person who could do that to you. I was a coward, Juliet. I was so afraid of the family falling apart that I helped him drive you away. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I see the truth. I finally see my son for who he is. And I finally see the incredible woman I failed as a mother. I read the letter, folded it, and put it away. It wasn't absolution, but it was a start. It was the truth. A year has passed since that night. Life has a way of moving forward even after the earthquakes. My relationship with my parents is a work in progress. It's tentative, fragile, but it's being rebuilt on a foundation of brutal honesty. My father survived his surgery, and I flew out to be there. We talk on the phone now, really talk without the old pretenses. My mother is in therapy, trying to untangle the knots of her own making. It's not the family I grew up with, but in many ways it's more real. There's no easy, happy ending there. Just the slow, difficult work of rebuilding from the rubble. As for Matthew, I have had zero contact with him. My parents told me he's also in therapy, that he's trying to understand his own malignant behavior. I feel a profound and complete indifference to his journey of self-discovery. My healing required one thing from him: his absence. I have set a boundary made of steel and silence. He is out of my life permanently. I learned that some relationships are not meant to be mended. Some betrayals are so foundational that the only healthy response is amputation. Recognizing that has been one of an incredible source of my power. Last month, on a bright windy day, I took the shoebox of Leo's letters to a cliff overlooking the ocean, not far from my home. I sat there for a long time, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I read one last letter, acknowledging the hurt, flawed young man who had written them, another victim of my brother's quiet war. I felt a pang of sadness for him, for us, for the young people we were. Then I built a small fire in a portable fire pit. One by one, I fed the letters to the flames. I watched the smoke carry the words, the lies, the pain, and the 8 years of stolen history up into the vast blue sky. I wasn't burning them in anger. It was a release. I was letting go of the past, not by pretending it didn't happen, but by accepting it and refusing to let it define my future. The deepest betrayals aren't always the loud, explosive acts. Sometimes they are the quiet, sustained campaigns of lies that follow, the slow poisoning of the truth. I spent 8 years believing a story that was written for me by my tormentor, and finding the truth didn't just change my past, it redefined my future. I learned that forgiveness isn't always for the person who hurt you. Sometimes it's about taking back your own story, your own power. I couldn't forgive Matthew for what he did, but I could release him. I could release the anger, the bitterness, and the hold he had on my life. And in doing so, I found a deeper peace than I ever thought possible. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you. It's about who tells you the truth, who protects your heart, and who helps you build a life where you feel safe and loved. It's about your chosen family. I'd love to hear from you now. Have you ever had to deal with a family member who gaslit you or tried to control the narrative of your life? How did you find your way back to your own truth? Share your story in the comments below, because every story shared makes someone else feel less alone. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories about finding strength in the face of adversity. And please share this video with anyone you think might need to hear it. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to stand up for yourself. I wish you all the strength and peace in the world.